listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Welcome to another edition of the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Femi Abebefe. As always, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. Michael, an eventful week in the National Football League, as it always is this time of year. We'll, of course, get into the shocking news of Deshaun Watson being out for the season. We'll get into all the quarterback stuff with the New York football teams, of course, what's going on in New England, as well as breaking down the marquee matchups in Week 11. But we have to start with what's going on in Western New York. The Buffalo Bills, a once thought of Super Bowl contender, feels like, Michael, season on the brink here with them firing Ken Dorsey after Monday night's loss to Denver Broncos 24-22. So Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator, is out. Joe Brady will be the interim OC, but feels like the walls are caving in on the Buffalo Bills this season, sitting at 5-5.
You know, it seems like an act of desperation. It does, in the sense that we're going to change the offense, which is really going to change the problems. I think really when you look at the situation, Femi, and you got to take a step back and you got to look at, okay, how did we get here? Why are we here? And where we're going? And I think for me, the Bills have a structural problem. And it's a structural problem that's common for teams that are close. I can speak from experience, because when I was in Cleveland in the late 80s, and I got there right after the meltdown, the drive where they went 98 yards, and then I was there for the fumble, and we couldn't beat Denver. And we became an organization that became so preoccupied with beating Denver that we lost sight of the ultimate goal. And I think when I watch Buffalo, I see a team obsessed with beating Kansas City and not a team understanding that they're building what they're building there structurally doesn't work in Western New York and outdoors. It just doesn't. They're building a small defensive team that relies on the offense to get the lead, the defense to create turnovers, and the defense to be able to use its speed, its quickness to make plays. In theory and on paper, that looks really good. The problem is, if you peel back the layer, you realize that Peyton Manning, as great as he was, with the same philosophy, better team, much better team. The talent level on the Colts was much better than the talent level on the Bills, if you compare apples to apples. And they went 9-10 in playoff games. They lost 7 on the road. This doesn't work. The Bills, under the direction of Sean McDermott, because this team is built with a defensive slant to it. With Sean and Brendan Bean, they've built this team on a defensive notion that they're going to be able to win games with their defense. And even when you listen to Sean talk after the game, it's like everything that goes wrong with the team relates to the defense. And I think that's really the core issue here. When you peel it back, that becomes the problem. And they have no physicality. Now, they have no identity on offense either, but they have no physicality anywhere across the board.
And you mentioned the no identity on offense, because when you look at some of the underlying metrics, the advanced metrics, it shows that the Buffalo Bills are a top 5 offense. But when you look at the scoreboard, you don't see them putting up those points, and do, in fact, because of turnovers. Like, the turnovers have been a big deal here for Buffalo. But why do you think we're seeing these turnovers? Because Josh Allen had 2 interceptions. He lost 2 fumbles in the game. They had 4 turnovers. They lost the turnover margin by 3 to a Broncos team that was kind of playing a conservative game plan, just trying to manage the situation and eke out a victory here. But we've seen this be an issue week after week after week. What is the reason behind the turnovers? Is it Josh Allen, or is it something fundamentally wrong with the offense, like you've kind of alluded to?
Well, these turnovers aren't a fender bender. This has been a pattern since 2018. Josh Allen leads the league in interceptions since 18. He leads the league in fumbles since 18. So this hasn't been just the last 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. Now, what he's so good at doing is masking the problems, right? They've yet, and this is why you're asking why do they turn the ball? Because they don't have a foundation of offense. They really don't have. They run plays to get the lead. They steal plays, they run certain things, concepts, because they're in a rush to play from in front. I mean, Josh Allen, of his 60 wins, he has 45 of them have been by more than 7 points. Like, this has worked. You can't dispute it. McDermott's got a 62% winning percentage as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. You can't argue what they're doing doesn't work. What doesn't work is when it gets tougher, when the weather turns, when the playoffs come around, when you can't bully other teams around, and when you have to rely on your offensive and defensive linemen. I mean, I think one of the big things here is their failures, to me, come down to the reality which they don't interacting with about 3 things, right? So they don't really have the right perspective or vantage point on what it takes to be a champion. They're so occupied with beating Kansas City, which we were too in Cleveland. And I said this to myself, and I wrote it, and I said it to other people. We got to stop thinking about beating Denver. Mm-hmm. We should start trying to beat Washington. We should build a team to beat Washington. We should build a team to beat Dallas. We should build a team to beat the Giants or Philadelphia, because whenever they go play Denver, well, no, I was just talking about the NFC East. Whenever they go play Denver, they kick their ass. Like, they literally just beat them up, right? But the vantage point is we got to beat Kansas City. So we're going to have a nickel defense to handle Mahomes and run around. Yeah, we got to beat Mahomes, but we got to be able to play in Western New York. I think there's a little bit of a denial. You know, Brendan Bean talks about, you know, he was quoted as saying that, I think I have it here. He said it always starts with both lines. You have to secure your quarterback and O-line, then go get the opposing quarterback before you secure the skill position and playmakers. Okay, so they've had 52 total draft picks over the years. They've used 11 on defensive backs. They've used 6 on defensive linemen, 7 on linebackers, 9 on offensive linemen, 7 on wide receivers, 4 on running backs, 3 on quarterbacks. But when you break down the first 3 rounds, you know, they've used 4 picks in the offensive line in the first 3 rounds. They used 4 picks on the defensive line in the first 3 rounds. But they used 2 number ones, and they never have drafted a number 1 offensive lineman. Mm-hmm. So, and they've drafted 2 defensive backs, corners in the first round. So, like, yeah, they're putting resources, but they're patching it. They signed Stafford. They signed this guy. They got Mitch Morse. They're trying to patch together a line when they don't really have any blue chip players within their offensive or defensive line. You can't argue that. You could look at anybody's metrics, mine. Don't take my word for it. Go look at all these other teams. I mean, they paid Ed Oliver like he was the best defensive tackle in football. They paid him. He's the 15th best defensive tackle in football, right? Mm-hmm. And he's not even. And he plays between 50 and 58% of the plays. Okay, he's got 5 sacks this year. He's got 19.5 total sacks. Like, he's a good player. He's not the 15th best tackle. Deion Dawkins is their left tackle. Is he a top 10 tackle? No. Spencer Brown, please. Okay, you know, they drafted Rosario. I think that's how you say his name.
Gregory Rousseau
from Miami.
Yep, Rousseau. Yeah.
Rousseau. I mean, is he a top 10 player? No. I think this is what happens to them. They don't have enough blue or red chip players. You know, and then when you get into the East, you know, they're really good against the Patriots, but against the Jets and Miami, they're 9-12-1 against the spread, and just against the Jets alone, they're 4-6. Why? Why are they 4-6 against the spread versus the Jets? Because the Jets front beats them up. So I think that's the issue with Buffalo. To me, it's a structural issue. It's not a Ken Dorsey issue. It's more of a, hey, Sean, we got to figure out what we're doing with this team. We got to rebuild these lines. We can't just keep putting we put money in Von Miller. You can't find him, right? Von Miller's not making a difference on their team. They have no physicality in their offensive line. They can't, you know, if Allen's not the guy running. I mean, I think Cook was a good player. They don't trust him. Yeah. And then here's the other problem too, Femi. We haven't touched it. They're old. This is an old team. They're 25th in the league in years. You know, they lose Hyde, they lose Poyer. Milano's not an old player, but they lost him. When they had Daquan Jones, they were really good up front. He showed you what a 3 technique's supposed to look like. They don't have them.
Yeah, the injuries in the secondary. Tre'Davious White, another one, but he's been hurt the last few years, it feels like, for him there. And you mentioned Dorsey not being the problem. Josh Allen was asked about Ken Dorsey earlier this week. Here's what he had to say with the dismissal of his offensive coordinator.
I love Dorsey. As a human being, he's one of the good ones. He's been in this room with me for a very long time. I feel like I owe him a lot of the success that I've had in my career, and he's been a huge part of that. So it's sad to see him go. And the fact is, we play better as a team. We probably don't have to make a move like that.
Which is an interesting comment, because he said if we play better as a team, because Sean McDermott was asked about it, of course, on Tuesday about the dismissal of Dorsey. He said, just felt like it was time for a change. We need to be a confident offensive football team and find consistent production, and that's really what it came down to. But some might make the argument that if they don't have 12 players on the field on the field goal, they win the game, and then we're not doing it. So it's like,
remarkable. It's remarkable. Nobody's bitching about it. I mean, they called their second timeout on second down when Russell spotted the ball, and then on third down Russell spotted or second down they called their whatever. But they used a timeout. Okay, they used a timeout before Russell spotted his ball the last time. So when you use that timeout, why didn't you just, if you're a head coach, why didn't you just say, okay, put our field goal block team on the field right now? They're going to center the ball. They're not running a play.
Yeah.
Right? They're not running a play. They're going to center the football. You put and then this way you don't have to substitute because they're substitute. Let them screw it up. We're not going to screw it up. But of course he doesn't get blamed for that. And I think to me, when you look at this, hey, the other thing he doesn't get blamed for, the last 3 playoff games, this Bills defense has given up an average of 33 points a game. Don't tell me that this is a team that can go on the road and win, because they can't at 30. Now, Josh Allen's great. They can overcome a lot, but they can't overcome the structural damage that they've done to the team.
And I think this kind of, to put a bow on it, and we'll talk about the elephant in the room as well on the other side as we get into the Cleveland Browns, but to put a bow on this, like that, trying to beat Kansas City, it feels like 13 seconds is still in their head. I don't know if they haven't gotten over it from the last couple years here, that playoff game at Arrowhead Stadium, to where it felt like they were going to win the game.
We need to pick that up.
Blew it. We will pick that up. We'll also talk about the Cleveland Browns situation at quarterback. This is the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Michael, it feels like this McDermott Bean era of the Buffalo Bills is kind of defined by 13 seconds and what we saw a couple years ago in the playoffs against the Kansas City Chiefs there. They went ahead and fired Leslie Frazier after last season, but it felt like, that was kind of coming toward a head
here. They
didn't
fire him. They didn't fire him. They went to Leslie. McDermott went to Leslie and said, I want to take over the play calling. And Leslie's like, no, we're not doing that. And then he said, okay, if you want to do it, then you're going to have to let me go. We'll say it's health reasons, but I'm going to go. And Leslie's been visiting a bunch of camps all the summer. He's going to get back in next year. Yeah. So, yeah. And now he fires Dorsey. Yeah, I think the 13 seconds is haunting him, because the 13 seconds is and it hasn't learned from it, right? He rushed 4 guys with 13 seconds left to go. He'd kicked the ball out of the end zone with 13 seconds, with Pringle as the return guy. Okay, so kick it out of the end zone even if Pringle's there, but why rush 4? Why not just rush 2? Well, you want the quarterback to hold the ball. They had no timeouts. You want them to try to throw it. Every second you take off the clock does you a favor. They complete 2 passes and you're in field goal range. This one, to me, was egregious because they didn't play good and they had a chance to beat Denver on a last-second field goal. The other thing he doesn't get blamed for, he runs a 0 blitz against Russell Wilson and knocks him out of field goal range. And then, for whatever reason, he blitzes again, 0 blitz. And I know they paid Teron Johnson a lot of they paid him, but he can't cover anybody. And he certainly can't cover Jerry Jeudy in a 0 blitz situation. And he gets the PI on him. That's the other issue. It's like they paid Ed Oliver, they paid Teron, they paid Von Miller. They're paying guys. They're as my spiritual advisor and as Springsteen says, they're more desperate than courageous. They really are. And I think that desperation stems from that 13 seconds. It really does. And you fire these coordinators. Look, I hated the Bills' offense, but the Bills' offense, even when they were going good, was just running. They were stealing plays. They never said, okay, if we go play Buffalo, you better make sure you do this. What you say when you go play Buffalo is, we better make goddamn sure we take Josh Allen out of the game. I mean, think about it. McDermott takes over a 7-9 team from Anthony Lynn and Rex Ryan. Okay? That team lost 4 of their last 5 games, and 1 game in overtime. Okay? So he comes in, he goes 9-7 his first year. They get a wild card game, and they lose to Jacksonville 10-3. They draft Allen. Allen is a rookie that goes 6-10. Come back. In year 3, another wild card game, loses to Houston in overtime. Remember that game down there in Houston? They're dominating the game. Allen, was kind of getting accurate again. Then the 13 seconds disaster. And those last 3 games, he's allowed 33.3 points. I mean, if you're we give Staley a bunch of shit, but this defense, when it has to play in the middle of the ring and it can't play a style, I mean, remember what Cincinnati went up there with their offensive line last year? Do you remember this?
Yep. It was like 3 backups on the O-line for Cincinnati.
Of course it was. And they kicked their ass. So, to me, you could talk about it. It all comes down to, I think it's a structural problem in Buffalo. And I think as they're getting older, they're going to have to restructure.
Last thing on this is if the Bills don't make the playoffs, which right now they're a dog to do that. They're minus 250 to miss the playoffs over at DraftKings. If they miss the playoffs, is this the end for Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane in charge in Buffalo?
I can't imagine that. I think to me, I think somebody would have to be able to explain what I just explained to them in a fashion that's a football. Do you think Pagula knows that? If he's just looking at the scoreboard, they could be in trouble. If he goes in there and says, look, fellas, I think we got to fix this the right way, then maybe. But, it's going to be a hard thing. I mean, it's going to be hard. It depends on the building, too. When you throw guys off the bus like Leslie and Dorsey, and what you listen at what Allen said, do you think how much of the building really enjoys working for Sean?
I tweeted it on Monday or Tuesday morning. I said it feels like the walls are kind of caving in on Sean McDermott there, to where maybe he's starting to feel the pressure and the internal pressure to try to turn this thing around. But it feels like season on the brink to me, and we'll get into their game a little bit later on in the pod. But, man, for both of those teams, it could be a loser leaves town matchup in Western New York come this Sunday. Let's talk about a team that we thought was turning the corner. We thought this team was about to come in and be like this AFC contending kind of team, and that is the Cleveland Browns. Big victory Sunday over the Baltimore Ravens, but unfortunately they get the news yesterday that their starting quarterback Deshaun Watson is out for the rest of the season. He will undergo season-ending shoulder surgery, so it will be Dorian Thompson-Robinson the rest of the way here for the Cleveland Browns, or at least on Sunday for the Cleveland Browns. But to bring this back to Watson, though, obviously the guaranteed money is astronomical, and through 11 games, they've paid him about $90 million, and they haven't really quite got the results that they have wanted here. But what do you make of this situation out there in Cleveland?
Well, I mean, they paid him. I mean, they knew they weren't going to get – last year he was going to get suspended. I mean, look, I admire the kid for – I was worried about his ankle. We were monitoring his ankle all week, and he played the second half in that game going 14 for 14 with obviously a broken shoulder. I mean, so that gives him some sense of toughness. And he did it behind backup offensive linemen. I mean, he didn't even have DeJuan Jones at right tackle. He had to they put Hudson over there. And so, he's got a kid that they picked up off the street, Garen Christian's playing. I mean, give Billy Callahan a lot of credit for keeping them upright. But look, they had no choice but to go back to Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I mean, they had no choice, right? Because they traded away Dobbs. And at that moment when they traded away Dobbs, they had to have a meeting and say to themselves, we feel really good about DTR. We feel really good, And so we're going to go with him. And yes, I understand that he had a great preseason, but we all know what preseason looks like, right? We all know how that goes. But, at some point you just make the decision they have to do something substantial that's long term. Now, here's what remains. They've got the easiest schedule of any of the North teams. The Bengals have the hardest schedule, right? The Bengals have the hardest. The Ravens have the second hardest. The Steelers have the 9th, and the Browns have the 24th. So they have an easy schedule. So that helps them. And their defense will stop teams from running the football. That's pretty clear. They got to play great run defense, which they will. And they can't turn the ball on over offense. I mean, they just can't. I mean, he had, the last time he played, he threw 3 interceptions. He only had 6 first downs. They got to be careful with the football. They run the ball well. They ran the ball on Baltimore better than anybody with backup linemen. Look, it's not going to be pretty, but they still can do it with that schedule and their defense.
Yeah, and to be fair to the Cleveland Browns, we didn't like them because of the quarterback play that they've been getting this season. We liked them because of the defense that you mentioned. So if DTR can just kind of sort of keep this thing afloat, and last time when he started against Baltimore, it was a little bit of a tough spot, and Kevin Stefanski alluded to that earlier this week, saying that, hey, he didn't really know he was going to be starting until the end of the week. Now it's his reps all throughout the week. They can kind of get him better prepared for this start against the Pittsburgh Steelers here. But with those backup tackles, it's going to be tough sledding against that Pittsburgh Steelers front for sure here. Do you still have faith that they can
remember, they didn't have Cam Hayward in the first game. I mean, look, I think one of the big issues here is the last time they played them, the most points the Steelers have scored all year were the 26 points they scored against Cleveland in week 2. 14 of them came off turnovers.
Yeah, defense, yep.
I mean, the Browns had the ball for 10 minutes and 44 seconds in the fourth quarter in that game. The Steelers had 14 possessions, 8 went without a first down, 2 were with turnovers, 2 field goals, 1 touchdown, and 2 end of the half. I mean, they did nothing really, and they scored 26 points because the Browns gave them. It's like what Paul Brown says about football. Football's a game of errors. Whoever makes the least amount of errors is going to win. He's right. He's right.
Yeah, isn't that just a Steeler game though? Every week they had all these stats that go against them, and they win the football game.
It's amazing. I mean, no team in the NFL has gained more points from turnovers forced than the Steelers. It's just really remarkable. I don't know if you want to call it luck or, they play on a short field. They're able to do it. And, the one thing that's different than the Steelers than, say, the Jets or, say, the New England Patriots is the Steelers players like the quarterback. They really do. Mm-hmm. They like Pickett. Even though he's not playing very good, they like him. Whereas I don't get that sense in New York or in New England.
Well,
I shouldn't say the word like. I think the word there is really they trust Pickett.
Gotcha.
He's one of them.
Pickett has endeared himself to his teammates.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's a good way to put it there. On the Cleveland side of it, do you still see this Browns team as a playoff team? Like you mentioned, the schedule is a little bit easier than some of the teams that they're competing for in that AFC wildcard spot. Do you still think that they make the playoffs here?
Look, I know the Steelers have been great. I love Tomlin, you know that. But now they've lost Quan Alexander and Holcomb. They're 2 inside guys. And if you know anything about Steeler defensive acumen, they need to have that. They've been trying to replace Ryan Shazier for years. They haven't been able to do it. I mean, I don't know if they can. Can they run the ball? I mean, that's been the key. The last 2 weeks, the Steelers have run the football effectively. That's what they've been able to do the last 2 weeks. That's why they've won the last 2 weeks, because they've been able to get their ground game going. But can they do that? They have not thrown for over 228 yards the whole time. When they throw for over 200 yards, just simply 200 yards, you know what their record is?
Well, what's their record?
4-0. Just 200 yards. Just 200 yards. If they throw for 200 yards, they're undefeated. I mean, that's how it is. But, the first time they played them, they couldn't run the ball. Steelers, they gained 55 yards on the ground. They averaged 2.6. In the last 2 weeks, they've had the most first downs. They have had over 20 first downs for the first time all year, and they've run the ball for a combined 375 yards the last 2 weeks.
Speaking of running the football, that's something that Cleveland has done very well. So Dorian Thompson-Robinson kind of rely on that run game this season. They're second in the league with 147.9 yards per game. And since Stefanski's been there since 2020, they've been in like the top 5, top 6 in terms of yards per game. But that was also with Nick Chubb. But even there's been a lot of no Nick Chubb this season here, and they've been able to run the football. Ford is a good player. He's a good player. He is. He's got a lot of juice there in the backfield there. So if they can run the football, maybe they can keep this thing afloat here. Last thing on Watson, though, the cap hit over the next 3 seasons, $63.9 million each season. Can they do anything to adjust that, or is that they just got to kind of swallow the
building? That's it. Yeah. It's grin and bear it. Femi, you're paying it.
Man.
You're paying it.
That's a lot to be paying.
That goes back to asking the question, when we get into situations, what happens if?
Yeah.
And they didn't do that.
And worst case scenario here is that he's now injured. Sounds like he'll make a full recovery for next season, but in 2 years, it's been 12 starts, 8-4 in those starts, but his yards per play is at a career low at 6.5. Completion percentage also at a career low at 59.8 since he's been the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. We'll get into some more tenuous quarterback situations on the other side of the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
All right, let's go up to New York here, where the quarterback situation has been not ideal. And we'll start with the New York Giants, because earlier this week, our buddy Jordan Schultz over at Bleacher Report, NFL Insider, reported that Daniel Jones will be back next season for the Giants, and barring something drastic, it's my understanding that GM Joe Schoen and head coach Brian Daboll will as well. So sounds like Daniel Jones will be back. I mean, he'll be back, but he'll be back as QB1. I think that's two different things. And maybe him being back means he will be the starting quarterback. But we've talked about how, like, hey, maybe this is kind of a time to turn the page here on another chapter of quarterback play for the Giants. But maybe they see it differently.
Well, they're not going to turn the page. I mean, look, even if they draft a quarterback, they got $36 million tied up next year guaranteed in Daniel Jones. So they'll bring Jones back if they draft a quarterback, which I would strongly recommend they do. But, I don't know if they will. But say they draft a quarterback, they'll play Jones. They have Jones. They could trade Jones if they wanted it. It's a contract that maybe somebody would take. If not, they carry him at $36 million. They pay him, then the next year they get rid of him and they start the young kid. This would be their Alex Smith, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. What Alex Smith did, and they drafted Mahomes. Now, they're not a good team around them. I mean, I know that I'm a Giant hater. I'm fully aware of that, which I'm clearly not. But I know, so if you listen, if the Giants, I mean, let's just put things in perspective here. So this is all just numbers. Forget Michael Lombardi's. They're 27th in EPA. With Tyrod Taylor was 27th in EPA. Daniel Jones was 40th. DeVito was 42nd. Could you imagine DeVito and Daniel Jones were close in EPA? Could you imagine that?
That's rough.
Is that unbelievable? Okay, that's so that it gets better. I mean, it gets better. I mean, according to, and I saw Aaron on DVOA, Aaron Schwartz, the guy that runs the DVOA stuff. Yep. Shots, okay. He said the Giants are the 13th worst team through 10 games since 1981, and the worst team in the league since the 2019 Dolphins. Now, Is that a talent problem or is that an injury problem? But let me add a little bit more to it, okay? Let's go through it. Again, because I make all these stats up to hate the Giants. I make them all up, right? Okay, in the first quarter this year, Femi, the Giants averaged 0.9 points per quarter. That's what they score in the first quarter. They give up 6.1. So by the first quarter, they're down 6 points, or 5 and change. In the second quarter, they mount a tremendous offensive attack, much like Napoleon when he was taking over France. They average 3.3 points per quarter. They give up 9.2, okay? Mm-hmm. The third quarter is when they're really ready to go. They're ready to go in that third quarter.
Second half adjustments.
3.7 points, 3.7 points in that third quarter. Now they give up only 6.3 there. And in the fourth quarter is when they flourish the most. They score 3.9 points in the fourth quarter on average, and they give up 4.7.
Sounds like.
Now think about that.
It doesn't sound like a good formula.
Now think about that. Think about those numbers. Now if you're going to be really fair about it, is it a talent issue, or is it a scheme issue? Because is it just because you have a bunch of guys injured? Certainly, you lose two quarterbacks, you're not going to move the football very much. But you got Saquon Barkley back there. You've got this offensive line. I know they've been hurt. But these numbers are historically bad. I mean, the last time they played the Giants, the last time they played the Washington team, there were 31 first downs in the game. There was only 6 conversions. 5 of them were by the Giants. Only 1 by the Washington team. So, I mean, how do you not need a quarterback when I read this off to you? When I tell you that Jones and DeVito are close in a lot of numbers, other than completion percentage, you got to worry about that. 40th EPA to 42nd. When I looked up the numbers, I was shocked.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely brutal for the New York Giants. And like you mentioned, injuries have played a part O-line was banged up and all that stuff here, but man, you really wanted to see something more than that. And like, do you think that this is because the roster outside of the injuries hasn't been that much different from what we saw last year? Like, why did it work last year versus this year? Like, what's going on?
Because the schedule, which what we talked about all off season. Yep. You know, I mean, they started fast. They managed games well, new schemes. They got ahead of people. They played. But the second half of the season, I kept saying it, the second half of the season, they couldn't beat a good team. Yep. I mean, Detroit walked in there and beat them. And Detroit didn't make the playoffs. I mean, this is a clear case of not being honest in your evaluation. You know, and it's a little bit, too, we wrote about this for the Daily Coach today. I don't know if you read it. And I don't know how I'm saying it. It's called the Astellong effect. And what that effect is scientists did an experiment. And basically, the more experience you have in the field, the less likely you are to you use that experience at a fault. You block out creativity and innovation. So even though you have this tremendous amount of experience, like a lot of people in the Giants organization do, there's no innovation or creativity because they're stuck in a rut. They have all the same people doing all the same thing. And so this effect relates to that. And so you don't make good decisions. So even though you have great expertise, you know, you think, let me rely on my experience. You're like, wait a minute. What you're doing is you're making decisions based on your experience, but you're not allowing yourself to think about some of the different ways you might be able to approach these problems. I mean, it writes as if I were a consultant and got hired by the Giants to say what could help our organization, this would be the effect I would be citing.
Yeah, and in this article, which we encourage everybody to read on the Daily Coach, you talk about change your pattern of thinking, triple check what you assume to be true, think outside the box. Because I think it is easy for everybody to say, hey, I've been doing football for all my life. Like, I know what wins, I know what loses. But you kind of block out any sort of idea that might actually enhance your expertise there, because that's how you find the edges, and that's how you can go ahead and win within those margins, which the Giants were able to do last year, but this year, not so much. It's kind of gotten off the rails, to say the least, out there in the NFC East. How about the other New York team, the New York Jets, Gang Green? Because every week it feels like there's a weekly Zach Wilson update. Robert Saleh, the head coach, is asked about Zach Wilson, but our friends over at DraftKings actually tweeted out and compiled all the quotes from Robert Saleh after some of these losses. After week 3 against the New England Patriots, this is Saleh on Zach Wilson. Quote, "He's our unquestioned quarterback. After week 4 against Kansas City, I thought he was really good. So I thought he played pretty well against Kansas City. After week 9 against the Chargers, there's only so many things a quarterback has control over. And then last week after the Las Vegas Raiders loss, quote, he's actually playing pretty well." If he's actually playing pretty well, why did we plead the fifth last week on the radio show?
I mean, I think he thinks people don't remember what he says, obviously. And he's losing credibility. Every time he makes this statement, he's losing credibility in his locker room.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he should say, Zach Wilson sucks, but I think he should say, look, we all got to get better. We haven't scored a touchdown. And I mean, since, as the great Uncle Junior says, since Moses wore shorts, I mean, like, we haven't scored, so there's a lot going on here. I love this line he had. Well, it's taken, Zach Wilson's trying to run Aaron Rodgers' offense with Hackett. And he's trying to push the blame onto Hackett and his offense. Are you kidding me? I worked with Hackett's father at the 49ers. He knows the West Coast offense. That's what Nathaniel knows. Like, tell me a offense that's more quarterback friendly than the West Coast. Like, every excuse he comes up with, he shows Woody Johnson. Is this who I want to lead the team? Right? I mean, I get that he's a cheerleader. I get that. Right? But, like, to me, I'm not defending Zach Wilson here. But when you got to stand up in front of your team, like, it would be like for me, if Belichick walks into the room on Monday when they come back from the bye week and he sits there and says, hey, we're going to go and play Mac Jones again after he benched him, after the entire team witnessed one of the worst turnovers in the history of turnovers, a wide receiver so wide open that Dominic, my grandson, or Leo, my grandson, who's a year younger, could have hit him, could have made the throw, okay? And yet he turned the ball over and doesn't, I got to keep getting better. He keeps saying I got to get better, but never does, and you could say, well, the Patriots suck, all that. Okay, great. Blame it on the team. But if you don't get good quarterback play, it's hard. You lose credibility with your team.
Mm-hmm.
you lose credibility in the locker room. You can't afford to do that. So every time Saleh makes these comments, the players in the locker room are looking like, look at what our coach said today.
Yeah.
Look what he said today.
Yeah. It ends up like the players start having their little conversations of like, oh, like this guy's BSing and trying to protect Zach. Meanwhile, we're getting our asses chewed in the meetings about why we're not, stopping the run or whatever. And it starts to kind of like create this imbalance in terms of accountability to where it looks like Zach is not being held accountable versus maybe the defense gets accountable. And that's how you get a little bit of a friction in the locker room. The Jets did have a players only meeting earlier this week. So anytime you see the players only meeting, something not good is not happening in the organization.
No, nothing good comes out of that. Nothing good comes out of that.
That's the first red flag. It's the players only meeting.
What are we doing? I mean, look, they gave up. I mean, let's face it. I mean, you played a Raider team that couldn't move that can't really playing a rookie quarterback.
Yeah.
And so, and the Raiders, I mean, what's funny? I hear this every time I listen to something. They say this Jet defense is dominating. It's the greatest defense of all. I think, what would Ray Lewis say? What you give up 203 yards rushing to the Giants and Tommy DeVito? You give up 148 yards to the Raiders, who hadn't had a 100-yard rushing game the whole year. I mean, come on.
Elite.
I mean, look, I think they're a good defense. I'm not disputing that.
Yeah.
But I think the morale of the team, they're 18th on third down defense. And Saleh's saying, how about this? He says Wilson's playing really good. Did somebody mention to Robert that he's 32nd on third down conversions? And he's 32nd in the red zone. I mean, did somebody might have mentioned that to him? I mean, think about that. He's 32nd in both those categories.
I mean, they haven't scored a touchdown since the first half of the Giants game. That was like 2 weeks ago.
Even Mac Jones is 26th on third down and 14th in the red zone. Now, he's not any good either. I'm not defending him. I mean, everybody was complaining about Matt Patricia last year. Mac Jones' interception percentage was 2.5. His rookie year, his interception percentage was 2.5 his second year. It's up to 3.1 now. It's up to 3.1. At some point, he's at a complete crossroads of his career because, he hasn't been able to come anywhere near. He's 1 yard less yards per attempt than he was his rookie year.
We'll have a broader Mac Jones discussion next week once the Patriots come back from the bye week. Mac Jones was benched in Germany at the end of that game. He said he hasn't been told or they haven't talked about whether he's going to be the starter out of the bye. We'll get into all of that when the Patriots come back. And guess who they're playing? They're playing the New York Giants out of the bye week. I'm sure that's going to be one hell of a game out there in the Meadowlands. But let's get to the marquee matchups to wrap up the pod next.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
All right, we typically don't hit Thursday Night Football here just because a lot of the audience downloads and listens to the pod on Friday, but the game is too good for us to pass this up. Bengals at the Ravens tonight. The Ravens are 3.5-point favorites over at DraftKings, total 46. Cincinnati coming up, both teams coming off with a loss, but for the Bengals, they don't want to fall to 500. They're sitting at 5-4 in last place at the AFC North. How do you see this game playing out later on tonight?
On paper, you just think, oh, my God, Baltimore should take this over. Baltimore's got injuries. They won't have Ronnie Stanley tonight. Cincinnati won't have Sam Hubbard tonight. They've got a bunch of injuries. They won't have T. Higgins tonight. Look, I think one of the things that has gotten caught a little bit outside of what Joe Burrow's been able to do as he's returned is this Bengal defense is not very good. They're really not. They have not been able to slow anyone down. And they haven't been able to improve from the start of the year, and they started like they were like 30th. Now they're 20th in yards per drive, but, they're able to turn the ball over. So it kind of masks some of the things that they're doing, and they're good in the red zone because Amaromo's a good coach, right? But just on down after down, you just say, how are they going to keep this game close? I mean, C.J. Stroud guys were wide ass open. They were wide ass open, and the Bengals are 26th overall in third down defense, and this Raven team can convert third downs. So to me, the other issue is when you look at the game, Fem, the Bengals are not a great team on the road, straight up. Now I know they went in there to Baltimore in October of 21, and they won 41-17, right? Last time they played in Baltimore won 19-17. Then the Bengals came back and beat them last year, 27-16, but there was no Lamar.
Yeah.
But in 21, they scored 41 points twice off of them. And they did it at home and away. So, look, the Bengals have a tough road ahead. They got to play Pittsburgh. They got Jacksonville. They got Indianapolis, Minnesota. They got Pittsburgh again. They got Kansas City and Cleveland. I mean, leaving that one there was hard. And this Baltimore team, you watched that game last week against Cleveland, and you're like, how did they lose this game? They give up they got gifted to them. They get a pick six to start the game, right? They get hit a slant for a touchdown with Beckham. They get a punt return fumble that gives them field position. It's just they didn't run when they can't run the ball, when Baltimore can't run the ball, and they couldn't run the ball other than a 39-yard run by Williams, they struggle. But I think they'll run the ball against Cincinnati because everybody runs the ball against Cincy.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting game from a total standpoint because I believe this total's been getting bet to the over, open 44, now 46. I took the points with Cincinnati, took to +4, even at plus 3.5. I like it.
Was it +4?
Yeah, it was +4,
Yeah.
but even I'd take 3.5 as well. I mean, there's not a whole lot of difference between +4 and 3.5. Sometimes the game lands 4, but I mean, hey, getting more than the field goal I think is the key point there. But to me, it's just like I think Burrow. It's so attractive getting Burrow in those points, but I do have a lot of respect for Baltimore though. Like I hope I'm not stepping in it once again, fading this Ravens team, but we'll see what happens later on tonight. But I think the loss of Marlon Humphrey could be big here for Baltimore because they said he's doubtful yesterday. I doubt that he plays in the game if they're going to list him at that. Trey Hendrickson somehow on a short week with a hyperextended knee, he's going to play. I mean, I don't know what that guy takes every morning, but I want some of that. He's going to play somehow in this football game. So I think this is one of those kitchen sink games from the Cincinnati Bengals because they can't afford to fall to 5-5. I think they play close. It's a field goal game either way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, typically these are, but usually the dog wins in the North. I think the under always comes in. What nighttime unders are now 25-7. They're on an 11 straight win streak. And the North, typically in the North, the AFC North, the underdogs are ridiculously profitable. Yeah. I mean, that came up on Bet Labs today. If you bet the dog, just blindly bet it without the game. And when you bet dogs in low total games, like when the total's lower, the dog ends up cashing. To me, on paper, you want to take Baltimore. But based on all, like this would be the football side of my brain, just take Baltimore. Mm-hmm. The betting side of my brain, which I really didn't know very much, as I'm learning over the years, is like you should take the points here. So I kind of like in the middle. Although Lamar, when he gets humming,
It's tough.
They'll get going.
It's tough.
Look, with that, Morgan Moses didn't play last week, so they had Patrick Makora. I don't know how to say his last name. Yep. Makari. He's not a very good player at all. He was playing right tackle. Now he goes over to left tackle. Boy, that's scary.
Yeah. Well, let's power through some of these Sunday games here. The Chargers, we got our guy Staley against your guy Big Daddy. That's going to be a fun Sunday afternoon. Chargers 3-point road favorites at Lambeau, total 44.
So I'm at dinner with Big Daddy last night, and I said to Big Daddy, well, we're going to put I said, we'll put the Packer game on the screen because Matthew's game against Miami, with the Raiders, that's on at 1, so we'll have one game on, and then we'll put your game on too. We'll have both on. Oh, they're going to lose by 3 touchdowns. I'm like, Big Daddy, like, do you realize, like, the Packers have been one of those teams, they're 1-4 in close game. Like, they can't win a close game. But they've been in close games. I mean, they've been in close games. They just haven't been able to close it out. They haven't been able to find a way to win those close games. And so, when you look at their margin, they score they've given up like 20 points a game and they score like 16.5. They're right there. I mean, they cover that number last week if they just make the extra point where they push it, depending on what you have. So, I think to me, look, the Chargers in these kind of games, when are they really ever good, right? And last week the Packers ran the football. And the Chargers, which had been playing really good really good run defense, they couldn't handle it. The thing about Love is he's so hard to predict his ability to complete passes. He's they have this aggressive rating and quarterback ratings. He's at 20.7. Like, he's trying to put the ball into places he doesn't need to.
Mm-hmm. It seems like he's forcing it sometimes, but he also feels a little bit streaky.
Big Daddy predicts a 3-touchdown loss. He predicts a 3-touchdown loss. I said, how can you predict that? 3 touchdowns. How can you predict that? They haven't lost by 3 touchdowns to anybody all year.
Maybe he's going to lay an alternate spread with the Chargers.
I mean, he's like Caruso. He just comes up with his own spreads. I mean, how about the Packers have only scored 49 points in the first half all year? That's 5.5 points in the first half.
I said it on the pod last week. I said that Steelers-Packers first half under. Shockingly, we got boom, boom, boom touchdowns on like the first 3 drives of the game. I was stunned seeing that game last week. But then the scoring started to slow down and Pittsburgh won the game. How about in the Motor City? The Bears, they've been getting bet quite a bit so far this week against the Detroit Lions. This opened like 10, 10.5. Now we're down to 7.5. Fields, my guy, making his return to the field.
Well, and it's shocking too because Goff is so good against the spread versus the North. I think he's on like 11-game heater in that category. But here's the reality. When you break the game down, forget the numbers and bet labs and all that crap. The Bears have been playing really good run defense. They're the number 1 team in yards per attempt allowed rushing. They're really good up front. They play an 8-man front. They know how to fit their runs. Their run defense, other than the Kansas City game when everybody was hurt, they've played really good run defense. You have to throw the ball to beat them. You've got to be committed to throwing 40, 45 times. And you got to, you can still use play action, but you're going to have to throw it. So it's going to be and Detroit wants to run the ball. They want to be balanced. They want to be able to have that in them. So I think a lot of people see that 10 as a number that's too high. Plus we know Detroit struggles with athletic quarterbacks. I mean, Fields can run the ball around on them. Mm-hmm. Now he's going to have to make plays in the passing game. It's going to be hard for the Bears to run the ball other than Fields against a really good Detroit front. So I think Detroit's defense is really overrated in the sense that if you can throw it like Herbert could. I mean, last week Herbert had 4 drives of over 10 plays and 1 drive of 7. And in the last 5 drives of the game, he scored touchdowns only to not be able to win the game. So I see this as both teams should move the ball. It depends on the quarterback in the air. I thought 10 was too high. I really did.
Yeah, I think 10 was the number that you wanted to back the Chicago Bears. Now that we're down to 7.5, it's probably Lions or pass. But get this, since 2021 when Dan Campbell took over, best ATS team in the league are the Detroit Lions, 30-13 against the spread. You are living on an island if you've just been backing the Detroit Lions blindly each and every week. Let's get to the afternoon slate. Seahawks at the Rams. Matthew Stafford expected to return. Seahawks 1-point favorites on the road.
I've said this. I'll say this again. I said at the start of the season when I recommended taking the Rams. I'll say it again now. When the Rams are healthy, they can play with anybody. And the elite teams, they'll struggle with winning the fourth quarter. But I love the Rams here. I think you got to take them. I think Stafford's healthy. They get Haverstein back. All their receivers are healthy. McVay's had a week off to game plan. Look, Seattle did a really good job against Washington until the fourth quarter. Their offense had over 500 yards, but the game should not have been as close as it was. But these games typically are close. The line, the only reason the line opened at 3 was because they thought maybe Stafford wouldn't play.
Yeah.
This will be a fun game. I think this game goes over. I really do.
Yeah, it'll be a fun game and definitely over at SoFi Stadium. How about the Jets, Bills? We talked about both of these teams earlier, but what do you think happens in this game? The Bills touchdown favorites, total 39.5.
Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. If the Bills don't get a play from in front, right? I mean, I wrote about it in the column. They've been outscored. I think they've been outscored in the first half 73-33 in the last 6. And they're 2-4 over the last 6 games. I mean, so when you fire Dorsey, you haven't been exactly very good defensively either now. I mean, look, I don't understand why the Jets don't try to run the ball, slow the game down, rush the quarterback, take Diggs out of the game. I mean, how really should the Bills move the ball on them? If you put Gardner on Diggs and you make it play an 8-man front and you say, okay, make somebody else beat me, who's beating you? Who are you worried about? Kincaid? He's a nice player. Don't get me wrong. You should dominate this defensive line. I don't care if you're playing at home this offensive line, you should dominate it. And, it's like last week. If you watch the Colts play the Raiders, Colts play the Patriots. If the Patriots just would have run the zone play every play, they got double teams on the 3 techniques, the 2 tackles of the Colts, and knocked them off the ball. They could have had 5 yards every play. Like, you can't get bored if you're the Jets. You got to just call the same. You got to cut the game to the fourth quarter and make it close. I'm tempted on Sunday to recommend the Jets. The problem is I stare at that Josh Allen is, of his 60 career wins, 45 have been by 7 points or more.
Yeah, no, I think it's tempting to take the Jets. Last one, who do you think wins Vikings at the Broncos Sunday Night Football?
I think the Viking bubble could burst.
That's what I think too. Broncos, man, they're kind of ascending. We'll see what happens in the second half of this season as they got a big win Monday night. That does it for us here on the pod. Thank you to our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. Subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you to you, Michael. I will talk to you on Monday as we react to Week 11.